Hello there, Ben Bowers, the Spirit Specialist, and I'm here today to talk to you about the third and final release of the first of a seasonal series. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. It is Lochlea Sowing Edition, but this is the third crop. So Lochlea, being a working farm, growing their own barley to produce their own whiskey, throughout the last 3 years, they have done a seasonal release that follows the farming year. So 4 bottlings throughout the year that evoke spring, summer, autumn, winter. We've got sowing, we've got harvest, we've got fallow, and we've got ploughing. And if you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll have seen that I've reviewed pretty much all of them, and they are quite distinctly different styles to evoke those seasons through the year. But I've been reliably informed by Patrick, who's the sales manager, brand ambassador, whatever you want to call him, that the third crop is the last of the crops. As of next year, we are going to find some different releases as they start looking into moving into age statements and that sort of thing. So what's quite handy is that for the last 2 years, I have done essentially the first year and the second year of Lochlea's releases as tasting events, and hopefully I will do a third as well. So not only do I have the third crop, but I also have a little bit left of their first crop, and the second as well. So what this is going to be is a video that is not just a review of the third crop, but also hopefully a look at the potential evolution between the first, the second, and the third. So before we go into that and I tell you what this tastes like and how it compares to the previous two, let me give you some background information about the Lochlea Distillery, the Lochlea Farm, the history behind it, and also the makeup of these releases.
The Lochlea Distillery is a conversion of the farm buildings at Lochlea Farm, situated 8 miles south of Kilmarnock, and at which the world-famous Scottish writer and poet Robert Burns lived and worked from 1777 to 1784. Plans for a distillery by the current owner Neil McGeoch were approved in 2014, and whisky production commenced in August 2018. Rennie, who'd previously been distillery manager at the likes of Bruichladdich, Ardbeg, Kilchoman and Annandale, initially worked with Neil as a consultant before coming on board full-time to oversee the birth of the whisky. However, he then left to join the rebirth of the Rosebank Distillery in October 2021 and was replaced by John Campbell, who had previously been the distillery manager at Laphroaig for 16 years. The distillery is another new whisky venture who are producing a grain-to-glass spirit. They grow their own barley in fields literally over the road and have their own water source. The bottle itself features embossing referencing the tyre tracks that surround the farm as well. Lochlea Sowing Edition is the first of 4 seasonal bottlings that represent the progress of a farming year. Along with sowing in spring, we can experience harvest in summer, fallow in autumn and ploughing in winter. And it has been announced that the third crop is the final year for what was an annual series. To evoke the fresh springtime feel as fields are planted, maturation takes place solely in first fill ex-bourbon barrels, and in comparison to the second crop, the third crop has about 9 months extra time spent in cask, with 8,500 bottles being released at an ABV of 46% and no colouring added or chill filtration taking place.
So now I'm trying to decide which way around do I do this. Do I do the third crop first, talk about that, and then do 1, 2, 3? Or do I start with the first, then go to the second and the third? I think I'm actually going to start with the first and see the progression through it. Now, as you'll probably tell from my previous Lochlea videos, I love the distillery. I love their flavour profile that carries on through all of their bottlings. And I personally always describe it as being stood in fields of grain. I was fortunate enough to have John Campbell join me on one of the tastings. He dialed in from Canada briefly and gave us a bit of a sort of background information in terms of his involvement with it and what his thinking was behind it. And that cereal element, which does evoke fields and grain growing and things like that, is a very much an aim of theirs that will be a flavour profile that will continue through every single bottling that they do. But as we see with the sowing, the harvest, the fallow, the ploughing, is you then use that and you use cask types to take those in different directions. So sowing, which is evoking springtime, is lighter, it's fresher, it's citrusy, it's citrusier, because we've got the bourbon casks being used, first fill bourbon casks. Whereas once you start getting to fallow, which is just sort of like Oloroso and PX and heavily sherried, it's a different beast altogether to this. but you still get that core flavour coming through, that core feel of farming fields, arable farming in essence. So let's do the first crop. So I'm not going to delve too deeply into the first two, but what I'm hoping to give you is some kind of impression of what these are offering and how it is developing over time, because all three of them are using first fill bourbon casks, and it's basically just older stock being used. So there should hopefully be a sort of a similarity between all three of them, but then a development of potentially complexity or edges being sanded down, that sort of thing. So let's go for the first one. So first crop, which came out 2 years ago. Really light and fresh on the nose. Notes of definite grain. There's a citrusy note. There's kind of like a lemon curd feel going on. There's a slight creamy softness to it, but it's very much zingy. There's a hint of white pepper on there. There's a little bit of a sort of a citrus zest and white pepper. There's a high note as well as this underlying creaminess on the nose. Just checking the ABV on them because they were all 46%. I think it was the harvest that changed on the first crop. And hopefully I'll be able to do these with the remaining crops that come out. I do have remnants of previous tastings as well. And what's on the nose on the first crop absolutely carries on through. It's zesty, it's citrusy, it's light, it's quite delicate. There is a soft underlying creaminess. Very much like a lemon cream, lemon puff. It reminds me a little bit of Filey Blay Flagship, which again is ex-bourbon casks. You do get a soft, so you get that cereal note. On the nose, the cereal note is more grainy. On the palate, it's more of a kind of Cheerios with a little touch of milk in it, slightly softened. And that citrusy note does come through. So I'm going to try and leave a little bit, because as you can see, I don't have much left of these. And they've been pretty well sealed. So I'm confident that we're not going to lose much in terms of them being decanted into miniatures and everything like that, and losing any particular complexity through evaporation or what have you. So let's move on to the second crop. And I'm going to try and leave a little bit so that we can go back to them when we get to the third. So the second crop, interesting. That higher note is just tempered down a little bit. We've got a little bit more of a pepperiness coming through. The citrus is not quite lemon curd. It's not quite as intense as that. It's still there, but it's not as prominent as it was before. Definitely softer and feels like it's lacking something, but weirdly feels more complex, if that makes sense. There's not as much of the zing as there is on the first crop. And on the palate, that citrusy, it feels fresh. It feels lemony, touch of lime in there as well. But it's much fresher. It's much more of a fresh lemon juice, that sort of feel. Not tart, it's sort of slightly diluted, but very much kind of, again, soft, easy drinking. You do get that grain, that cereal feel, not so much grain, but cereal coming through. Those Cheerios have been sat in that milk for a little bit longer. They've got a little bit softer, but it feels rounder, and there's more of a texture to it, and there's more of a richness. So there's a definite development between the first and the second without it going completely drastically different, which is kind of what you would expect with it being essentially the same cask type and just with older stock in there. So now we move to the third crop. So this is still the same price as the first crop was. It's quite nice that the price hasn't gone up in any way. They've remained at $49.99 since the first crop came out. Ooh. That citrusy note is kind of back, but not as creamy. It's more rounded. It's more intense. It smells almost like a lemon drop martini. There's more going on in here. There's kind of there's lemon and there's lime and there's almost a slight note of tequila weirdly. This kind of slightly floral, slightly grassy note starting to come through. Very much a sort of like a very, very good tequila, mezcal. Not smoky in any way, but more of a floral grassiness that's coming through there. This feels more spring-like on the nose immediately. It really feels like fields are starting to kind of almost sprout. Maybe less sowing and more kind of like sprouting, kind of developing. Lovely texture. Loads more going on with this. Touch of oak is starting to come through here, but it's pulling all the flavours kind of, it's separating the flavours, but actually allowing you to pick up more of what's going on. Cheerios note now less creamy, more pronounced. There's a floral note in there. There's lemon zest, there's lime zest. Starting to get a touch of almost like orange cream coming through. The texture's lovely. It's very interesting that the mouthfeel gets richer and thicker, and it feels like as you go through the first, the second, and the third, it feels like it begins to coat the mouth more and more as each crop has been released. Really, really moorish. Different things appearing. Like again, that white pepper comes back, but there's things appearing now on each mouthful that wasn't there on the first and the second. It definitely has developed. You're getting much more complexity. The finish is a lot longer as well. Finish on the first really dies off quite quickly. It's a little bit longer on the second. This is still going as I'm talking now. And as you know, I am wont to talk quite a bit. So let's go back to the first. I've got a tiny little bit in here. It's interesting. This now feels really tight, like everything's concentrated, and it's kind of like it's not being allowed to kind of let loose. It really feels central. It feels like there's a ball of flavour in the mouth, but that's it. Whereas on the third, that expands and it coats the side of your mouth and it has a lot more. And the finish really dies away. There's the finish on the first crop is quite short and quite not sharp, not astringent, but compared to that, it feels tighter. And then the second, let's have the third again. Like the softness, the complexity, the length, the mouthfeel. Back to the second. You absolutely get a development between first and second and third. First feels tight. There's lots of flavour going on, but it's quite difficult to pick everything out because it's not releasing. The second is it's starting to just open out a little bit. You get citrus, you get floral notes, you get grain, you get Cheerios, you get a creaminess, but it's still not quite there, and the mouth feels not rich enough to really allow you to kind of pick up all those separate flavours. And then when you get to the third, it's fully opened out. I almost kind of wish that I know that now this is the last one they're going to do. But I know why they've done it, because it's quite a lot to be kind of having for sale is 4 bottles every year of this seasonal edition. But I do hope they come back to this and they almost have like an older version, you know, maybe give it as a 8-year-old, or maybe when they get to a 10-year-old, you have a 10-year-old Sowing. I'd be really interested to see how that develops over time, because instantly, one after the other, you can absolutely see this progression. And there's not many opportunities that people get, whiskey drinkers, retailers, even producers, unless you're working in the distillery itself. There's not many chances you get where you can actually taste that development of this is what a whiskey, a spirit is doing in cask over time. We're using the same types of cask, but this is how it is developing. The third is definitely the best of the lot. 1 and 2 are good, don't get me wrong, but the third absolutely is the pinnacle of those 3. It's opened out, it's giving you all the flavours that it has to give. I think there's potentially even more to go. But if you want a light, easy drinking, for people that like a lighter whiskey, like a Glenfiddich or a Glenmorangie or anything like that, where you want something a little bit fresh, fruity, soft, easy drinking, that is the one to go for. I have stock available. It's $49.99, as with the rest of the range of the seasonal editions. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to check that. Yes, it's $49.99. For some reason, I thought it was more expensive than that. Available to purchase, www.spiritspecialist.com. I will be doing a video on hopefully the rest of them as well, because I still have harvest and fallow and ploughing, although I've got a way off till fallow and ploughing go out. So keep an eye out for those, and I shall see you at the next video. Cheers.